She stepped into the cafe wearing white silk gloves and a designer coat, though it was tattered at the sleeves. Her lipstick was perfectly applied, but her shoes were falling apart. No one knew her name, only that she appeared every Thursday, ordered the cheapest coffee, and stared out the window for hours. People whispered, she used to be someone important, someone rich. But how did a woman once immersed in luxury end up forgotten on the city streets? Let me tell you her story. A story of secrets, betrayal, and the brutal fall from high society to the harsh reality of homelessness. Her name was Cassandra Hale, or at least, that's the name engraved on the gate of her former estate. The Hale House, an opulent Georgian mansion nestled deep in the hills outside Charleston. The kind of place where the sound of heels on marble echoed for miles and where waitstaff outnumbered the guests. Cassandra was the kind of woman who didn't just enter a room. She arrived. Her presence could silence a dinner party and turn heads at a gala. Every detail of her life was curated. Exquisite pearls, exclusive social circles, art auctions, and European getaways. But beneath the surface of glitter and champagne, something was brewing. Something no amount of wealth could shield her from. Cassandra came from old money. Her family had ties to shipping magnates and southern aristocracy. But she wasn't just a name on a trust fund. She was sharp, educated at Oxford, fluent in French and Spanish, and known for her philanthropic initiatives. She founded the Hale Foundation, which donated millions to literacy programs and women's shelters. To the world, she was a beacon of elegance and generosity. But every empire has its cracks. It started quietly. A few whispers in the financial circles. Rumors that the Hale accounts were under audit. Then came the hushed voices in cocktail lounges suggesting her husband, Richard Hale, was facing legal scrutiny. But Cassandra smiled through it all, always immaculately dressed, always in control. To outsiders, the Hales were untouchable. What no one knew was that Richard had been siphoning money from the foundation for years, covering failed investments and gambling debts. When Cassandra finally found out, it wasn't from Richard, it was from the FBI. The knock came on a rainy Wednesday morning. Cassandra, wrapped in a silk robe and sipping Darjeeling tea, opened the door to two federal agents holding a warrant and asking questions about missing funds. She didn't faint or scream. She calmly stepped aside and let them in. Within days, the story hit the news. Philanthropist's husband accused of embezzlement. Hale Foundation under federal investigation. High society in shock. Cassandra Hale silent on scandal. She was anything but silent behind closed doors. Her marriage, once an image of refined partnership, collapsed into screaming matches and broken china. Cassandra filed for divorce within a week, but the damage was done. Donors pulled out, the foundation was suspended, and public opinion turned cold. Suddenly, she wasn't a symbol of generosity. She was a scandal. Friends she dined with for decades stopped returning her calls. Her lawyer informed her that Hale assets were being frozen pending investigation. The estate, her family home, was considered collateral. And Richard? He vanished. No note, no apology. Just an empty drawer and a forwarding address in a country with no extradition treaty. She tried to fight. She hired a new attorney, made public statements, swore her innocence. But the legal system moved slowly, and the vultures moved fast. Her accounts were drained by litigation fees. The mansion was seized. Even her jewelry was repossessed to cover the foundation's missing millions. One day, she packed a single suitcase, white gloves, 3 outfits, a photo of her late mother, and walked out of the Hale legacy for good. She moved into a modest rental apartment downtown, determined to rebuild. She took temp jobs, data entry, personal assistant, even working at a boutique that once catered to her. The humiliation was relentless. Customers who once asked for her fashion advice now offered her pitying glances. But Cassandra was proud. She never begged. She never cried in public. That was until the fire. The apartment complex, old and poorly wired, caught ablaze one night. Cassandra escaped with just her purse. No renter's insurance. No savings. No home. Now, the woman who once held charity galas for the homeless was sleeping on a bench near the train station. She refused to go to a shelter. Too many questions, too many stares. Instead, she spent her days in libraries, reading, writing in a worn leather journal. At night, she curled beneath a wool coat that still smelled faintly of rosewater. She became a ghost in her own city. But every Thursday, she walked to the same cafe, ordered the same small coffee, and sat in the same corner seat. She would smooth her gloves, cross her legs, and stare through the glass as if waiting for something or someone. She never asked for anything, but the regulars began to notice her. Some whispered, "She used to be rich, you know?" Others said she was off or unstable, but just a few, watched her with something else, respect. One day, a teenage girl approached her. "Are you Cassandra Hale?" Cassandra blinked slowly, then gave the faintest smile. "I used to be." The girl held out a worn paperback book. It was Cassandra's biography, published years earlier during her philanthropic peak, Grace in a Gilded Cage. The girl said she'd read it cover to cover, inspired by Cassandra's work. She asked if it was all true. Cassandra looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "Once, I believed I could change the world. Now, I think the world changed me." But the girl wasn't discouraged. She came back the next Thursday, and the next. She brought others, students, volunteers, people who still remembered the Hale Foundation. They didn't come with judgment. They came with coffee, warmth, and curiosity. Slowly, Cassandra began to speak again. Not about what she had lost, but about what still remained. Her voice was different now, no longer adorned with perfection and poise, but it carried weight, wisdom, pain, and strength. It began with a dinner party. The chandeliers sparkled above a long mahogany table. Crystal glasses chimed gently as servers moved in seamless rhythm. Cassandra sat at the head, wrapped in a pale silver gown that shimmered as she turned her head to laugh at a guest's joke. Her husband, Richard Hale, stood at the far end of the room, cigar in hand, his eyes scanning the crowd like a politician on campaign night. The night was in honor of their 15th wedding anniversary. To the world, they were the perfect couple, refined, philanthropic, powerful. But behind the perfect posture and painted-on smiles, something had shifted. The warmth in Richard's eyes had dulled. His touch felt rehearsed. His business trips had grown longer, and his explanations thinner. Cassandra had felt it before, the creeping suspicion that something was wrong. But in her world, appearances mattered more than intuition. And so, she smiled wider and drank a little deeper. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the help had retired to the servants' quarters, Cassandra sat alone in her dressing room. She removed her earrings methodically, one at a time, and stared at herself in the mirror. Then came the sound, a soft clink like glass on wood. She turned her head and saw it, Richard's tablet, still glowing on the chaise. He never left it behind. Never. A man who guarded his privacy like a vault. Curiosity, that slow and dangerous creature, stirred in her. She reached for it. At first, the screen was innocuous. Calendar events, stock reports, unread emails. But then, an unfamiliar folder labeled simply, Red Sea. Her finger hovered over it, heart beginning to pound. Inside were dozens of spreadsheets, wire transfers, donation reallocations, shell companies she had never heard of, names she didn't recognize. It didn't take a forensic accountant to understand what she was looking at. Millions had been funneled from the Hale Foundation into obscure accounts. What appeared as charitable contributions were redirected, siphoned through a complex web of aliases and false vendors. And it had Richard's digital signature on every file. She froze. This wasn't a mistake. It was a machine, carefully orchestrated, years in the making. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but rage. All those galas, all those speeches, all the women she had hugged, the children she had promised support to. It was all a lie. The door creaked open. Richard stepped in, jacket off, tie loosened. "Looking for something?" he said, voice calm, eyes sharp. Cassandra held up the tablet. Tell me this isn't what I think it is. Richard's face didn't change. No guilt, no panic, just cold calculation. I told you not to get involved in the numbers, he said. You stole from the foundation, she said, rising to her feet. From me. From the people we swore to help. Richard gave a hollow laugh. Don't be so dramatic, Cass. You knew what this world was. These people don't care where the money goes, as long as they feel good writing the check. You played your part. So did I. She stared at him, stunned by the casual venom in his words. Get out, she whispered. He raised a brow. Excuse me? Get out of this house, this marriage, my life. Richard looked around at the gold-trimmed walls, the oil paintings, the furniture passed down for generations. Then he smiled. You don't seem to understand, sweetheart. This is my house now. And just like that, the illusion shattered. Over the next few days, Cassandra contacted her lawyers, initiated divorce proceedings, and tried to brace herself for the storm she knew was coming. But it came faster than she expected, and from directions she hadn't imagined. 2 mornings later, the federal agents arrived. They weren't just investigating Richard. They were investigating her. Her name was on the foundation, her signature on the bank accounts. It didn't matter that she hadn't known. She was complicit on paper. The media went wild. Cassandra tried to speak out. She held a press conference, her hands trembling only slightly as she denied any knowledge of the embezzlement. But the public, hungry for drama, didn't want innocence. They wanted guilt, fall, scandal. Her phone stopped ringing. Invitations stopped arriving. Her own board voted to suspend her indefinitely. Her world, once manicured and glittering, was now smeared in scandal. And Richard? Gone. His accounts were emptied. He had disappeared like vapor, leaving Cassandra to face the consequences of his betrayal. Authorities believed he'd left the country using one of the very shell companies he'd created. His name was added to a global watch list, but deep down, Cassandra knew he wouldn't be found. He had planned this too well. As days turned to weeks, Cassandra's legal bills soared. She sold her jewelry, her vintage car, then the smaller estate in Savannah. It wasn't enough. The house, the Hale mansion, was next. It had been in her family for 3 generations, and she watched it disappear with nothing more than a banker's signature and a court order. The final straw came in the form of a white envelope, delivered by hand. Eviction notice. Her last apartment, her last shred of stability, gone. She stood in the hallway of the crumbling apartment complex, suitcase in hand, as the door locked behind her. No staff to help, no car waiting, just silence. Cassandra walked for hours, through neighborhoods that once admired her, past boutiques she used to frequent, past the country club that revoked her membership. By nightfall, she sat on a bench, rain soaking through her blazer, her fingers clutching the only possession she had left. A photo of her mother, young and smiling, framed in cracked leather. And that's when it hit her, not the fear of being alone or broke, but the absence of identity. Who was Cassandra Hale without her name? Without her house, her husband, her foundation? A whisper of a voice answered inside her. You are still here. The first night was the worst. Cassandra sat on the edge of a crumbling fountain in a forgotten plaza near the train station. The marble beneath her was cold, and her thin blazer clung damply to her back. The streetlights flickered above like dying stars, casting long shadows that swayed with the wind. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just stared into the distance, her hands wrapped around the single photo she had left. Her mother in a sun hat, laughing on a beach Cassandra could no longer remember. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. On the second night, she found shelter under the awning of a closed flower shop. The owner arrived early the next morning and shouted at her to leave. She apologized, reflexively polite, and moved along without looking back. By the end of the week, Cassandra was learning the unspoken rules of the street. Never sleep in the same place twice. Never show your wallet. Never trust someone who approaches with a smile that's too wide. And most importantly, stay invisible. She wrapped a scarf over her once perfectly styled hair, now tangled and dull. Her gloves, once silk, were replaced with a pair she found abandoned on a park bench. They were 2 sizes too big. She wore them anyway. Her reflection in a storefront window startled her. Hollow cheeks, pale lips, a woman who looked like Cassandra Hale only if you squinted hard enough. A ghost of a debutante. She turned away. The city was different at this level. She began to notice things she'd never seen before. The discarded faces. The people who lingered on corners without purpose. The side doors of churches left ajar just long enough for someone desperate to slip inside for warmth. It was like a second world hiding in the cracks of the first. And then came Leah. They met outside a 24-hour laundromat. Cassandra had been watching the rotating machines through the glass, hypnotized by the way the clothes danced. Leah offered her a cigarette and a sandwich without asking questions. She was in her late 20s, wearing 3 jackets and a pair of men's boots with holes in the toes. Her voice was low and rough, and she never looked people in the eye unless she was telling the truth. "You used to be somebody?" she said after a long silence. Cassandra hesitated. "What makes you say that?" Leah shrugged. "The way you sit. Straight spine, shoulders back, like you forgot how to fold in on yourself." They sat together for hours that night. Cassandra didn't share much. Neither did Leah. But there was a quiet understanding between them. An unspoken pact made between 2 women who had lost everything but their instinct to survive. Over the next few weeks, they became a team. Leah knew where to get hot meals without ID. She knew which buses let you ride for free if you nodded at the driver just right. She knew which security guards would look the other way and which ones would throw you into the gutter without hesitation. Cassandra, in turn, offered something Leah hadn't had in years. Structure. She kept notes, organized schedules for soup kitchens and safe sleeping spots. She even managed to secure a library card using an old ID and a borrowed address. She read to Leah at night, mostly poetry, sometimes old legal articles. It made them both feel more human. But one day, the past came back. Cassandra was in a library reading corner when a sharp voice called her name. "Cassandra Hale?" She looked up and locked eyes with a woman in a navy suit. Stern, composed, clipboard in hand. It was Diane Travers, a former board member of the Hale Foundation. Diane's face twitched. Cassandra stood slowly, heart pounding. She tried to smooth her coat, but it was stained and torn. "I didn't expect to see you here," Diane said. Cassandra didn't respond. Diane hesitated, then softened. "Look, there's an opening at a women's shelter uptown. They need someone to help with intake forms. Just paperwork. Nothing complicated. I could put in a word." Cassandra blinked. It was the first offer of employment she'd received in nearly a year. "But," Diane added, her voice suddenly colder, "you'd need to clean up, rebrand yourself a little. No one needs to know who you were. Understand?" Cassandra stared at her for a long moment, then slowly sat back down. "Thank you," she said, "but I don't think that's who I am anymore." Diane said nothing, just gave a tight nod and left. That night, Leah asked why she didn't take the offer. Cassandra stared at the stars, visible through a tear in the tarp above them. "Because I'm not interested in going back to pretending," she said. "That world, it eats you alive." Leah lit another cigarette, handed it to her. "Still," she said, "you could have had a roof." "I'd rather sleep in the cold with someone who sees me," Cassandra replied, "than go back to a world that only sees my name." The next morning, Leah didn't wake up. Cassandra shook her gently, then harder. Her fingers were blue. The shelter said it was exposure. The weather had dropped into the low 30s. Cassandra had shared her coat, but Leah had insisted she was fine. At the memorial, a quiet affair in the back of the shelter, Cassandra read a poem. A few listened. Most didn't, but she didn't care. Afterward, she walked the length of the city. She stopped at her cafe, and sat at her usual table. Her clothes were ragged, but her back was straight. Her gloves, mismatched. Her hair, windswept. but her presence undeniable. She opened her journal, the leather cracked and weathered, and wrote one sentence. I am not what I lost. I am what I survived. Winter retreated slowly that year, like an old king forced from his throne. The first signs of spring came in spurts. Wet sidewalks, hesitant sunshine, flower beds daring to bloom along cracked pavement. Cassandra walked those same streets every morning now, not as a ghost, but with purpose. She had begun volunteering at the shelter where Leah had passed, filing intake papers, folding donated clothes, even writing thank you letters to the donors whose names she used to recognize at galas. Most of them would never know the woman behind the pen used to dine beside them in silk and pearls. She preferred it that way. One morning, as she stacked Ken's soup in the shelter's pantry, the front desk volunteer burst into the kitchen. Cass, he said, breathless. There's a guy here. Says he knows you. Won't give a last name. Says it's important. Her hands paused mid-motion. She wiped them on a towel and stepped into the lobby, squinting as the early sunlight spilled through the tall windows. And then she saw him, Benjamin Whitaker, her ex-lawyer, the man who once managed her estate and whom she had fired, angrily, during the peak of her panic. She hadn't seen him since the hearings, since he'd begged her not to sign away certain protections. At the time, she thought he was just another parasite feeding off her grief. He looked older now, thinner. A few gray strands streaked through his once perfect hair. Cass, he said, his voice a breath of both regret and urgency. I've been looking for you. Cassandra folded her arms. Why? Benjamin took a cautious step forward, glancing at the other volunteers. Because I found something big, about Richard. Her pulse quickened. I don't care anymore, she said, turning back toward the hallway. But Benjamin didn't move. You should, he said, because his web is unraveling. She stopped. Interpol tracked one of his shell companies through the Caymans, he continued. They found documents, Cass. Ones that clear you, that prove you didn't know. And there's more. He pulled out a flash drive. Emails, signed affidavits, testimonies from a man Richard bribed to forge your signature on half those authorizations. You were set up. Cassandra's stomach turned. All this time, she thought the world had decided she was guilty simply for being ignorant. But Richard had crafted a narrative, not just to steal, but to destroy her if she ever rebelled. Benjamin gently placed the flash drive in her palm. You can fight this. Get your name back. She stared at it. The tiny object felt like a brick in her hand. I don't want that name back, she said quietly. It doesn't belong to me anymore. Benjamin's face fell. Cass, you deserve justice. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Not as a lawyer, not as a man in a suit, but as someone who hadn't given up on her even when she had burned every bridge. I want something better than justice, she whispered. I want peace. Still, she didn't throw the flash drive away. That night, she sat at her usual bench and watched the city exhale. Lights flickered on across the skyline like fireflies. Taxis passed. Laughter echoed from a bar a few blocks away. She plugged the flash drive into a borrowed laptop at the shelter. The files unfolded like an autopsy report, brutal, thorough, damning. Page after page proved what she had long suspected but never wanted to face. Richard never loved her. He loved her pedigree, her connections, her ability to smile for cameras and keep the money flowing. She had been a beautiful mask he wore while he robbed the world blind. And she had worn it willingly until it cracked. She closed the laptop and sat in silence. Not mourning, not angry, just still. In the following days, she did what Cassandra Hale had once been trained for. She organized. She printed documents, wrote a concise timeline, drafted an anonymous report and sent it to the authorities, without returning to the spotlight. No press conferences, no declarations, just facts. She wanted the truth to come out, but she no longer needed the credit. What she needed now was meaning. The shelter was her starting point, but the seed Leah had planted of seeing and being seen began to grow. Cassandra started attending city council meetings. quietly, first just to listen, then to speak. She talked about how shelters weren't just temporary stops, but lifelines, how policies ignored the invisible, how a person's fall was often more orchestrated than accidental. The other attendees rarely recognized her. Those who did said nothing. They just listened. Soon, other women began to seek her out, not for autographs or advice on couture, but to talk. Widows, ex-cons, runaways, victims of schemes like hers. Each story different, each story the same. And so Cassandra began to write, not to reclaim the spotlight, but to create one for others. She launched a podcast under a pseudonym, The Glass Fall, a space where people shared how they had shattered and survived. Her voice, once reserved for charity galas and televised interviews, now carried hope in whispered stories and raw truths. Within 6 months, it gained traction. People from all walks of life tuned in. Donors began reaching out. She refused most of them. But for the few who asked not, "How can I help?" but "What do you need?" she made space. Eventually, a journalist uncovered her identity. Her face hit the headlines again, but this time the narrative had changed. Not fallen socialite, not embezzlement scandal, but woman rebuilds lives after losing her own. Cassandra didn't hide, but she didn't step forward either. She let the story grow roots where it mattered, on the ground, among the people who'd been ignored for too long. The cafe was quiet on Sundays. Not many people knew about the tiny place hidden on the edge of 49th and Lawrence. Only the locals, the ones who wandered on foot or stayed after church for something warm and sweet. Cassandra liked it that way. The owner, Marta, had grown used to her presence and often left a seat near the window reserved, even if Cassandra didn't call ahead. She sat now with a copy of The Glass Fall's latest transcript in front of her, editing notes in the margins with a red pen. Her coffee had gone cold, but she didn't notice. Her mind was elsewhere. The episode she was working on wasn't hers. It was the story of a young girl named Miko who had been trafficked across 3 states before escaping and rebuilding her life through art. Cassandra had cried recording it, and she rarely cried anymore. But today, something felt heavier than usual. Across the table sat a letter. Handwritten. Cream-colored paper. Expensive. Unmistakably formal. It was an invitation. To Cassandra Hale, "You are cordially invited to the 18th Annual Hale Foundation Gala, to be held at the Willowbridge Estate. In honor of your late parents' enduring legacy and your continued impact on the community, we request your presence as guest of honor." She had read it twice before and still couldn't decide what disturbed her more, the presumptuousness of it or the faint sense of longing it awakened. The Hale Foundation was no longer hers. Technically, it never had been. After Richard's arrest, the board had restructured. Public relations had begged for a redemption arc, for a symbol of restoration. And Cassandra, though cleared of criminal wrongdoing, had disappeared from the story. But now they wanted her back. Her name, her image, her forgiveness. Marta refilled her cup without a word, giving her a kind smile. "You going?" she asked. Cassandra looked up, surprised. "Didn't mean to read it," Marta added. "It just fell open when I wiped the table." Cassandra sighed. "I don't know. Feels wrong. Like I'd be letting them pretend nothing happened." "Maybe it's not about them," Marta said softly. "Maybe it's about showing people who you are now." That night, Cassandra walked the streets where she once wandered, homeless and invisible. The cold wasn't biting like it used to be. Her coat was warmer now. She wore boots donated by a nonprofit she later became a director of. The bench where Leah had died was still there. Someone had carved a small heart into the wood. Cassandra sat beside it and watched the world go by, just like she used to, and she thought about power, about silence, about survival. She thought about how easy it would be to fade away again, to stay behind the mic, to remain a faceless voice giving others light without ever stepping into it herself. But maybe Marta was right. Maybe it was time to close the circle. The gala was held in the same ballroom where Cassandra once celebrated her 25th birthday. In a gown flown in from Paris and a crown of diamonds borrowed from a designer, This time she wore a simple black dress. No brand, no gloss, just honesty. The room was filled with familiar faces. Aged, polished, indifferent. When she stepped in, conversation paused. Glasses stopped mid-air. There was a second of stunned silence. Then applause. Slow, uneven, but real. She walked past them without flinching. No smile, no nods. She took the stage, cleared her throat, and looked into the blinding lights. Not for glamour, but for truth. "Thank you," she said, her voice even, "for your invitation, for your applause, for remembering me." A pause. "But I didn't come here for nostalgia. I came because I wanted you to look me in the eye and see what happens when you fall and no one catches you." Murmurs stirred. She didn't stop. "I lost everything because I trusted the wrong man. But I stayed lost because this world, our world, doesn't know how to handle failure. You turned your backs on me. That was your right. But what I learned in that darkness is more valuable than any estate, any title, any applause." She pulled out a photo. It was Leah smiling, holding a sandwich outside the laundromat. She held it up. "This woman saved my life. She had nothing, not a dollar, not a home, but she gave me kindness when no one else would. Her name was Leah. She died in the cold while the foundation with my family's name raised millions. She never got a plaque. She deserved one. She let the silence thicken. Now I run a platform that tells stories like hers. Not for sympathy, for truth. The truth that suffering has a face, that redemption has a voice, that sometimes the fallen rise stronger than ever, just not in the way you expect." Her eyes scanned the crowd. "If you want to honor my family's legacy, don't do it with galas and chandeliers. Do it with shelter beds, with job programs, with reform. Do it for the invisible." She stepped down. No applause. Not yet. Then a slow clap. One person. Then two. Then the room gave in, not out of courtesy, but out of something more human. A recognition. A shift. Cassandra didn't smile, but something inside her softened. Outside, the air was cool and damp, just like that first night at the fountain. But she wasn't cold anymore. As she walked to the train station, someone called her name. A young girl, 17 maybe, nervous, holding a copy of The Glass Fall in print. "Ms. Hale? Your podcast helped me. I ran away last year. I almost didn't make it, but I listened to your story, and I didn't give up." Cassandra hugged her. Not politely, not distantly, but like someone who understood. "Keep going," she whispered. "Your story matters." And in that moment she knew. She hadn't just survived her fall.